This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Running a small business means I wear lots of hats. When I put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn Hiring Pro to make it easy. LinkedIn Hiring Pro helps manage my hiring workflow, puts my job post in front of a unique network of professionals, and matches me with the best candidates for my business. I can also share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. No wonder most small businesses say they'd use LinkedIn Hiring Pro again. Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
Hello and welcome to I Talk to Ghosts. I'm Jennifer, your host and resident medium. And tonight, dear listener, we will be discussing one of the most fascinating topics, near-death experiences, also known as NDEs. And there's a reason I picked this topic for right now. You may know that I live in Seattle, Washington, and there's going to be a big NDE conference happening this August, not too far from me. So I felt this would be a perfect time to discuss what these experiences actually are and to share some stories from a few of the people who will be speaking at that conference. We'll get into the full details on that at the end of the episode, but first, let's talk about NDEs. A near-death experience is a profound psychological event some people report after coming close to death. What makes NDEs so compelling is how consistent the reports are across cultures, ages, belief systems, even among people with no prior religious framework for what they experienced. And people have described their experiences for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian and Greek texts describe journeys of the soul leaving the body near death. And Plato wrote of a soldier who returned from the brink with a vivid account of what he had seen. Accounts like these show up across nearly every culture and era, long before anyone had a clinical name for them. The modern turning point came in 1975, when psychiatrist Raymond Moody published his book, Life After Life, a book that collected accounts from over 100 people who had come close to death and noticed the same handful of details showing up again and again. A tunnel, a light, a sense of peace, a life review. Moody's book is what actually coined the term near-death experience, and some say his work pulled the topic out of folklore and into something researchers were suddenly willing to study seriously. Psychiatrist Bruce Grayson developed a scale still used today to measure and compare the intensity and features of these experiences across patients. Cardiologist Pim van Lommel ran a landmark study following cardiac arrest survivors, which found that meaningful percentages of patients reported detailed, lucid experiences during periods when their brains showed no measurable activity. That study was published in the medical journal The Lancet, which is one of the most respected journals in medicine. And these experiences that coincide with no brain activity, brain science still can't fully explain how some of these experiences happen. Today, NDEs sit at this interesting intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality, studied everywhere from university medical schools to hospice programs, with new research still coming out on what happens to consciousness in those extreme in-between moments. And I thought before we get into tonight's 3 stories, I want to walk through some of the elements that show up again and again in NDE accounts, because it's honestly one of the strangest parts of the whole field. People from wildly different backgrounds, ages, countries, and belief systems keep describing the same handful of details, even when they've never heard another person's story before. The most common is a sense of separating from the physical body, often described as floating up and looking down at yourself from somewhere near the ceiling or above the scene entirely. Many experiencers describe this as calm rather than frightening, almost like watching a scene happen to someone else. From there, a lot of accounts describe movement, sometimes through a tunnel, sometimes through darkness, almost always towards a light. And that light is frequently described as brighter than anything on earth, but somehow not painful to look at, and often tied to an overwhelming feeling of love or peace. A life review shows up often too. For some, it's like watching a film of their life. For others, it's less about watching and more about reliving choices, feeling the impact those choices have made on other people. It's rarely described as judgmental in the way we might expect. Most experiencers describe it as more about understanding than punishment. Encountering others is another common thread, whether that's deceased loved ones, unnamed beings of light, or in some cases, a figure tied to the experiencer's own religion or spiritual background. And running underneath almost all of this is some version of a boundary, a barrier, a point of no return, a moment where the experiencer understands they have a choice about whether or not to stay or go back. And after the experience, what ties a lot of these threads together is also the after effects. Many report a lasting decrease in the fear of death, a shift in values away from material concerns, and in some cases, some people describe having heightened intuition or a sensitivity to others. So, keep some of this in the back of your mind as we get into tonight's 3 stories, because you'll hear versions of a few of these threads in each one, alongside details that are entirely their own. Chase had just turned 19 and was training for a position in the Air Force when he collapsed unexpectedly. He was rushed to the hospital and initial tests came back normal. But unbeknownst to him, there was an air bubble that had entered his IV line. He described the feeling of it traveling up his arm. At that moment, he said an unseen presence stroked his arm and a calm voice told him he would be all right. He tried to turn and see who was comforting him, and as he did, he watched his own heart monitor flatline. From there, he describes rising up and spinning through a rush of light, accompanied by what he calls angels, laughter, and a sound like music made of bells. He arrived in what he describes as a garden, more vivid and saturated in color than anything he had ever seen on Earth. And there he encountered a holy figure. Chase says that the exchange between them wasn't verbal in any ordinary sense. Rather than trading words back and forth, he describes the joy itself as the conversation, a wash of light and love that seemed to carry information and memory. Eventually, he was told gently that it was time for him to go back, and that he needed to remember to share laughter, joy, and love once he did, regardless of whatever he believed about his own past or worth. Chase came back changed in ways that lingered for years before he ever spoke about it publicly. He described a new sensitivity to the emotions of people around him, a felt sense when someone nearby had lost a loved one even without being told, and what he calls the ability to bring comfort through touch. He stayed silent about all of this for 12 years, worried people would be thinking he was lying or that he simply hadn't earned an experience like that. It took a veteran's mental health retreat in 2020 to finally give him the opening to talk about it all. Evan Mecham grew up in Salt Lake City, the kind of kid who plowed his neighbors' driveways in the winter and worked at the family gas station most nights through high school. He built a career from there. His work eventually moved him to the Rocky Mountains. On one cold March night, ice had formed on the mountain road as the day's melt refroze, and as Evan came over a small rise, his headlights caught a deer standing in the road. He swerved left to avoid it, and his car lost his grip on the ice entirely, and his car was struck by an oncoming semi-truck. Help was reportedly more than a half hour away, and despite his pain, he described that sensation simply leaving him altogether, replaced by a sensation like a warm blanket being drawn up over him as he let go and crossed over. What followed, as he tells it, is not a passive replay of his life, but something closer to living it again from every angle at once. He described a life review where he was made to feel the empathy behind every major choice he had ever made, including pain he caused people without ever realizing it, alongside the joy that he had shared. He says he felt met by an overwhelming, unconditional love, radiating from what he called beings of light. And he came back from the experience with a profound sense of gratitude towards the universe, his own family, and his life. Gratitude that he says has never left him. He describes that he became a kinder person in all kinds of small daily ways. Eventually, he left his job in the manufacturing business world entirely to retrain as a transpersonal psychologist, working today in regressive therapy, dream counseling, meditation instruction, and Reiki. Barbara Bartolome has actually described two separate near-death experiences in her life, first as an infant around 18 months old, though she wouldn't understand or name that an NDE until decades later. The story she tells most often is the second one, from 1987, when she was 31. She was the mother of 2 young children and coming out of a difficult marriage. She had gone to the hospital for a diagnostic procedure that involved injecting a contrast dye near the spine, and due to a medical error, the dye was misdirected. She described the shift as instant. One moment she was lying on the table, and the next she was watching up from near the ceiling as a full code blue broke out below her. The medical team called for a defibrillator and began chest compressions on her body. She says she felt entirely calm, simply looking down and thinking to herself that she must have died. She describes beginning to communicate with a loving presence, an exchange she has called deeply personal and reassuring rather than frightening. The most pointed detail she shares is the moment she was given a choice to stay or return. She has said that she had pleaded to come back specifically for her children, that the thought of leaving them motherless was what tipped the decision, and that she came back with a distinct sense that she had been given a mission rather than a second chance. When she awoke, she reportedly startled the surgical team by describing details of her own resuscitation, things she should have no way of witnessing if she had been inside her body. For more than a decade afterward, she told almost no one, worried about how she'd be seen in her community as a recognized local businesswoman. It took hearing a researcher speak at a conference in 2009 about the common after effects of NDEs that things clicked into place for her, and she began to recognize that unusual sensitivity she's carried since childhood fit a pattern that finally had a name. She went on to found her own local NDE support group in 2011 and has spent years since sharing her stories at conferences, hospitals, hospices, and colleges nationwide. There's something quietly comforting about the fact that after all our science and all our certainty about so much of the physical world, this one topic still glows with mystery. Nobody, not the neurologists, not the skeptics, can fully explain why a brain with no measurable activity produces some of the clearest, most vivid memories a person will ever have. It means we don't have the whole picture. I don't think you have to land on any particular belief for that idea to be meaningful. You don't need to decide there's definitely a heaven or definitely a specific being of light. The bigger question underneath all of this, that consciousness might not be as small or as tidy or as fully contained by the body that we've been taught to assume. Science is still catching up to what mystics and mediums and grieving families have quietly known for a long time, that there's more going on than what fits neatly into a textbook. And maybe that's the real gift between Chase's, Evan's, and Barbara's stories. Not proof of anything in particular, but permission to hold the question a little more closely. People who have had near-death experiences tend to come back different, softer, more compassionate, less afraid, more present with the people they love. If a glimpse of death can do that for someone, it feels worth letting it nudge you towards a more meaningful life right now, whether or not you ever get a definitive answer about what waits beyond our lives. So, if any of these stories moved you, and if you're in the Pacific Northwest at the time, the International Association for Near-Death Studies 2026 conference is happening on August 26th through the 30th. You can learn more about the conference and the International Association for Near-Death Studies at iands.org. I myself have not had a near-death experience, but a few years ago, I did have an out-of-body experience that very much mirrors a near-death experience. I think I've talked about it on this podcast in the past. And if not, I recently recorded a special interview episode with my guest, M. Schultz from the podcast, And That's Why We Drink. In that discussion, we talk about lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, and of course, ghost stories. If you're interested in any of those topics or are a fan of M. Schultz and their podcast, And That's Why We Drink with their co-host, Christine, I invite you to look for that episode soon. I really enjoyed our entire conversation, and I feel so lucky to know M. It's been a wonderfully spooky, spiritual year so far, and I'm so thankful to share all of this with you. Thank you for supporting my I Talk to Ghosts podcasts. Now, wherever you wander off, in this world or the next, just remember, come back and visit with me. Have a lovely evening and good night.